This link is for 4th grade going along with the story The Cricket in Times Square. If you go ahead and make sure your Treasures textbook is turned to page 692 and 693, this is where we're going to go ahead and begin. Of course, I'd like to go over the vocabulary words that we're going to encounter in this entire unit. Wistfully. If you look wistfully at something, you look with longing and sadness. Eavesdropping. Someone who is eavesdropping is listening in on another person who is unaware. Scuffling. Someone who is scuffling is walking without lifting his feet. Acquaintance. If you make someone's acquaintance, you meet the person. Jumble. A jumble is a messy pile of things. Scornfully. If you look scornfully at something, you show dislike or disgust. Logical. If an idea is logical, it makes sense and has good reason. Cricket. An insect similar to a grasshopper that makes a noise at night. Brook. A small stream. Liverwurst, a sausage made with ground liver. Forlornly, sad, and leery, cautious and distrustful. Okay, with that being said, let's go ahead and direct our attention to page 692 so we can talk a little bit about the genre that we're going to focus on in this story. The genre this week is fantasy. A fantasy is a story with invented characters, settings, and other elements that could not exist in real life. And then let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what our comprehension skill is going to be this week. Our comprehension skill is theme, and remember we're going to use that theme map as we read the story, and that theme map is going to be workbook page 195. So as I'm filling it out, you can fill it out along with me, and you're guaranteed that 100%. Remember that to identify the theme of a story, you should look for clues that tell you what message about life the author is trying to express. With that being said, let's go ahead and direct our attention to the story, The Cricket in Times Square. It's by George Selden, and the drawings are by Garth Williams. Now, this is not the actual full-length story. It's just excerpts of the story. So if you've read the entire story, you can see what they have taken out and what they have misplaced. Otherwise, let's go ahead and begin. It says Chester. Tucker Mouse has been watching the Bellinis and listening to what they said. Next to the scrounging eavesdropping on human beings was what he enjoyed most. That was one of the reasons that he lived in Times Square subway station. As soon as the family disappeared, he darted across the floor and scooted up the newsstand. At one side of the boards that had separated, there was a wide space enough that he could jump through. He'd been in a few times before, just exploring. For a moment, he stood under the three-legged stool, letting his eyes get used to the darkness. Then he jumped on it. "Psst," he whispered. "Hey, you up there, are you awake?" There was no answer. "Psst, psst, hey!" Tucker whispered again, louder this time, and from the shelf above him came scuffling, like little feet feeling their way to the edge. "Who's going psst?" said a voice. "It's me," said Tucker, "down here on the stool." A black head with two shiny black eyes peered down at him. "Who are you?" "A mouse," said Tucker. "Who are you?" "I am Chester Cricket," said the cricket. He had a high musical voice. Everything had seemed to be spoken to an unheard melody. "My name's Tucker," said Tucker the mouse. "Can I come up?" And I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. Now, I want you to find the word darted on page 694. Go ahead and tell me what you think the word darted means. I want you to use the paragraph clues, so the clues around in that word, to check what you think your prediction might be. Well, the phrases "out across the floor" and "scooted up" are the context clues. So in this sentence, darted means ran very quickly in one direction. "I guess so," said Chester Cricket. "This isn't my house anyways." Tucker jumped up beside the cricket and looked him over. "A cricket?" he said admiringly. "So you're a cricket. I never saw one before." I've seen mice before," said the cricket. "I knew quite a few back in Connecticut." "Is that where you're from?" said Tucker. "Yes," said Chester. "I guess I'll never see it again," he added wistfully. "How did you get to New York?" said Tucker Mouse. "It's a long story," sighed the cricket. "Tell me," said Tucker, settling back in his haunches. He loved to hear stories. It was almost as much as fun as eavesdropping, if the story was true. "Well, it must have been 3 days ago," Chester began. "I was sitting on top of my stump, just enjoying the weather and thinking how nice it was that summer had started. I live inside an old tree stump, next to a willow tree, and I often go up to the roof to look around. And I'd been practicing jumping that day, too. On the other side of the stump from the willow tree, there's a brook that runs past, and I've just been jumping back and forth across it to get my legs in condition for summer. I do a lot of jumping, you know." "Me too," said Tucker the Mouse, "especially around the rush hour." "And I had just finished jumping when I smelled something," Chester went on. "Liverwurst, which I love." You like liverwurst?" Tucker broke in. Wait, just wait." In one leap, he sprang down, all the way down from the shelf to the floor, and dashed over to the drain pipe. Chester shook his head as he watched him go. He thought Tucker was a very excitable person, even for a mouse. Inside the drain pipe, Tucker's nest was a jumble of papers, scraps of cloth, buttons, lost jewelry, some small change, and everything else that he could pick up in the subway station. Tucker tossed things left and right in his wild search. Neatness was not one of his things that he'd aimed for in life. At last he discovered that he was looking for a big piece of liverwurst he had found earlier that evening. It was meant to be for breakfast tomorrow, but he decided that meeting his first cricket was a special occasion. Holding the liverwurst between his teeth, he whisked back to the newsstand. "Look," he said proudly, dropping the meat in front of Chester the cricket. "A liverwurst. Now you continued the story. We'll enjoy a snack, too." "That's very nice of you," said Chester. He was touched that a mouse he had only known for a few minutes would share his food with him. "I had a little chocolate before, but besides that, nothing for 3 days." Eat," said Tucker. He bit the liverwurst into 2 pieces and gave Chester the biggest one. "So you smelled the liverwurst. What happened next?" Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and stop right there, and I want you to answer this question for me. What is the author's message about different types of characters becoming friends? What is the author's message about different types of characters becoming friends? Well, even though creatures may be different in many ways, they have some things in common. Even creatures as different as a mouse and a cricket can maybe like the same things and be kind to one another. With that being said, let's go ahead and put down a clue here. The clue is that Tucker encourages Chester to tell his story and shares his liverwurst. Okay, let's continue to read. "Now I hopped down from the stump and went off towards the smell," said Chester. "Very logical," said Tucker Mouse, munching with his cheeks full. "Exactly what I would have done." "It was coming from a picnic basket," said Chester. "A couple of tuffets away from my stump, and the meadows begins, and there was a whole bunch of people having a picnic. They had hard-boiled eggs and cold roasted chicken and roast beef and a whole lot of other things and a liverwurst sandwich that I smelled." Tucker Mouse moaned in pleasure of all the thought of that food. "They were having such a good time and laughing and singing songs that they didn't even notice me when I jumped into the picnic basket," continued Chester. "I was sure they didn't mind if I had just a little taste." "Naturally not," said Tucker the Mouse sympathetically. "Why mind? Plenty for all. Who could blame you?" "Now I have to admit," Chester went on, "I had more than a taste. As a matter of fact, I ate so much that I couldn't keep my eyes open. What with being tired from the jumping and everything, and I fell asleep right there in the picnic basket. The first thing I knew, somebody had put a bag on top of me and had that last of the roast beef sandwich in it, and I couldn't move." "Imagine," Tucker exclaimed, "trapped under a roast beef sandwich. Well, there are worse fates." So I'm going to stop right there, and I want you to find the word sympathetically on page 699. And tell me what the paragraph clues that help you figure out the meaning of sympathetically. What paragraph clues help you find out the word sympathetically? Well, Tucker says naturally not, and who could blame you? So sympathetically must mean with understanding. With that being said, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about further themes or clues that can help with the theme. So what clues on page 699 can you find to the story's theme in the way that Tucker responds to Chester's story? What clues can you find to the story's theme in the way that Tucker responds to Chester's story? Well, the two characters have just met, but Tucker listens with real interest to Chester's story. He notes that he would have reacted the same way as Chester did in the events. This kind of understanding between two characters shows how friendship grows. With that being said, we can go ahead and say that another clue is that Tucker listens well and says he understands Chester's feelings. Okay, let's continue to read. Now, at first, I wasn't too frightened, said Chester. After all, I thought they probably came from New Canyon or somewhere nearby. They'll have to unpack the basket sooner or later. Little did I know. He shook his head and sighed. I could feel the basket being carried into a car and riding somewhere and then being lifted down. That must have been the railroad station. And then I went up again, and there was a rattling and roaring sound the way this train makes, and by this time I was pretty scared. I knew every minute was taking me further and further away from my stump, but there was nothing I could do. I was getting awfully cramped, too, under those roast beef sandwiches. Didn't you try to eat your way out? Asked Tucker. I didn't have any room, said Chester, but every now and then the train would give a lurch, and I managed to free myself a little. We traveled on, and then the train stopped.